King Charles III has been crowned at Westminster Abbey in a ceremony built on ancient traditions at a time when the British monarchy faces an uncertain future. Trumpets sounded inside the medieval abbey and the congregation shouted, "God save King Charles," as the ceremony began on Saturday in front of more than 2,000 guests, including world leaders, aristocrats and celebrities. Outside, thousands of troops, tens of thousands of spectators and a smattering of protesters converged along a route. The king travelled from Buckingham Palace in a gilt-trimmed horse-drawn carriage. It was the final leg of a 7-decade journey for Charles, and from heir to monarch to the royal family and government, the occasion, code-named Operation Golden Orb, was a display of heritage, tradition and spectacle unmatched around the world. The rite was expected to be watched by millions, and many greeted the day with apathy. Some even met it with disdain. Republican protesters gathered outside to holler, "Not my king," of an institution they say stands for privilege and inequality in a country of deepening poverty and fraying social ties. A handful were arrested. This is All 24 News Special. Hello again and welcome to the program. Before we bring in our guests, let's follow this report signed by our own Usama Ayadi on the coronation ceremony.
Will you maintain and preserve inviolably
the things which I have herebefore promised? I will perform and keep, so help me God.
With these words of oath, King Charles III was crowned as the King of the United Kingdom and Great Britain and Northern Ireland in the biggest ceremony of coronation in 7 decades and in front of a congregation of more than 100 world leaders. After the most sacred and discreet part of the ceremony, when Archbishop of Canterbury Justin Welby anointed King Charles III in his hands, head and breast with the holy oil and with solemn looks of the new king. After being presented with symbolic regalia, the Archbishop of Canterbury and the spiritual leader of the Anglican Church slowly and proudly placed the 300-year-old St. Edward's crown on Charles' head as he sat upon a 14th century throne in Westminster Abbey.
God of compassion and mercy, whose Son was sent not to be served but to serve.
Charles' second wife Camilla was also crowned queen in this historic and solemn 2-hour service, which dates back to the 1066 era and the time of William the Conqueror.
God save the king!
God save the king!
With crowds cheering and greeting outside, Charles' eldest son and heir, Prince William, knelt before his father to pledge his loyalty as his liege man of life and limb.
I, William, Prince of Wales, pledge my loyalty to you, and faith and truth I will bear unto you, as your liege man of life and limb. So help me God.
Wearing silk and ermine robe, UK's new monarch left the abbey with his wife Camilla and departed in a 4-ton gold state coach built for George III to ride to Buckingham Palace in a 1-mile procession of 4,000 military personnel from 39 nations. With royal salutes from members of the military in the gardens of Buckingham Palace, Charles III and his wife Camilla were received in the palace as King and Queen of the United Kingdom, of Great Britain and Northern Ireland and other Commonwealth realms, after the first live broadcast coronation ceremony, where thousands of people gathered to greet the newly crowned monarch.
All right, let's bring in our guests. Joining me live from the UK, David Powell, writer and commentator on international politics, and Dr. Yvonne Ridley, journalist, author, columnist, and scriptwriter and PR advisor, as well as Marshall Staub, professor of medieval history at University of Sheffield. Thank you, gentlemen and ma'am, for agreeing to be with us. Let's start with you, Dr. Staub. Could you please tell us what is the significance of King Charles III's coronation, and could you please hark back to the tradition's history?
Yes, thank you very much for inviting me.
Pleasure is ours.
Well, Charles the third was king when his mother died, effectively. So the question always arises in cases where you have a coronation as to why basically you would have a coronation. So historically, things are obviously complex, but we can see some patterns, and one of the most important pattern is that it was a good opportunity to settle the legitimacy of a monarchy in periods of difficulty. But it's not the only context in which it arises. Obviously, tradition then plays a role and leads us to the situation where we are now. And it was expected that King Charles III would be anointed and crowned as his mother had been 70 years ago. So there is nothing particular there. That was basically to be expected. So now to get back to your question about the tradition. Again, complex question. I would say, first of all, we have sacred monarchy across the world and world history. There's nothing particular there. When it comes to the anointment as we know it, we have a pretty good sense of where it started. Strangely enough, or interestingly enough, it started in Spain, in Visigothic Spain, in the 7th century, so in the 600s. Developed then in the 9th century, as far as we know, in the Carolingian, so basically France and Germany nowadays. France first, Germany when the two countries were divided, and then it took basically place in Anglo-Saxon England in the 10th century, so the 900s. And the first anointment and coronation we know of at Westminster Abbey was possibly King Harold, just before he lost to William the Conqueror in 1066, who was himself then crowned and anointed at the abbey, which has been partly destroyed basically by the conquest. The abbey, as we see it nowadays, is basically mostly was started in the Gothic style, the French Gothic style, in the 13th century by Henry III, achieved basically or completed in the 15th century, 200 years later. That's basically where what it looks like nowadays. The only piece which is later even are the two towers, which are very prominent, but were added in the 18th century.
And do you expect that perhaps these rituals will perhaps change in the long run, I mean, in the future?
Well, rituals by definition seem to be, that suggests basically continuity, and that's basically one of the main function. But every ritual is different. So obviously history doesn't repeat itself, and it's true also of rituals. But what we can say is, first of all, there are subtle differences between the ritual 70 years ago and the ritual which took place earlier today. But one point which I would find interesting commenting on is, because I was struck by that as a medievalist, is the very strong emphasis precisely on the medieval traditions. You have to bear in mind, of course, that this is a monarchy, first of all, which was re-established in 1660, 61, and after basically a period of suspension and in following the Civil War. And also that's a monarchy which is, of course, a Protestant monarchy, with a ritual which is, in most part, a Catholic ritual. And indeed, the Reformation, Henry VIII, is the biggest caesura of all here. So what is interesting as well here is how you suggest basically something which is medieval, while, of course, tradition is reinvented all the time, and I could go on and on about that. But I wonder to what extent, basically, I was very intrigued, I would say, by the fact that the medieval elements were very strongly emphasized in the ritual today. And I wonder to what extent this can be related to something which is obviously the increasing secularization of British society, as you have it, and something which I would see as a kind of interesting relationship, a contrasting relationship, which would mean that basically the medieval traditional elements get all the more emphasized the less important religion becomes. So the more basically the coronation becomes something which is civic and no more, and the more important the medieval and the religious element become in the kind of presentation of the rite.
Very nice indeed. Well, let's include Dr. Yvonne Ridley in this conversation and this debate. Ridley, first of all, thank you for agreeing to be with us. Could you please tell us what was your overall expectation about this coronation ceremony? Was it as you expected, or perhaps less than what you were expecting? And what can you tell us about all these traditions and rituals that apparently were respected without any change? Nothing was particular. I mean, the coronation of King Charles III was not any different from any other coronation ceremony.
Well, of course, I live in Scotland, which, you know, the majority of the Scottish people are not that enamoured by the coronation. We believe it does not belong in the 21st century. And while it might be popular with people in England, it is certainly not that popular in Scotland, Wales, or Northern Ireland.
And have you watched the coronation closely? What was your overall impression?
Well, I spent today in Glasgow, one of the major cities in Scotland, and I spent it with about 50,000 other people like-minded people who would prefer to live in a republic and not under the command of a king.
I see. Now, I have a report here I invite you to follow that focuses or sheds light on the coronation ceremony of King Charles at Westminster Abbey in London, where many important personalities attended the ceremony. Let's follow. The report is signed by Zahra Frujani.
Saturday at Westminster Abbey is where and when King Charles III was crowned. World leaders and dignitaries turned out to mark the historic day, along millions of people who came from around the world. The ceremony is the second of its kind to be broadcast on television. It is a religious confirmation of Charles III's accession to the throne of Britain. The ritual took place amid strict security measures. For centuries, traditions have dictated that no crowned monarchs in other countries attend the coronation ceremony of British king. But this time, the matter is different, for it was attended by no less than 4 kings and queens and a group of princes and princesses. The Crown King also sought that the list of invitees numbering 2,300 be more representative of British society. So, he invited members of the general public to be alongside heads of state, kings and princes. The First Lady of the United States of America, Jill Biden, attended accompanied by her granddaughter Finnegan, while President Joe Biden was absent. Among those in attendance were French President Emmanuel Macron and Ukraine's First Lady Olena Zelenska, as well as British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak and leaders of the Commonwealth of Nations. As for what made this event remarkable is the presence of Prince Harry without his wife Meghan Markle and his 2 children who abandoned their royal obligations, and since then they have faced a barrage of harassed criticism of the British throne. More than any previous coronation, King Charles' coronation emphasized diversity and inclusion in Britain.
Back to you, Dr. Yvonne Ridley. How do you think King Charles III will impact the political and social landscape in the UK?
Well, it would be churlish of me to dismiss the coronation out of hand, but you have to remember we are going through an economic crisis in the UK. People can't afford to pay their bills. The supermarket shelves are not full of food, and there are real problems of poverty in today. And so to see such an opulent show of wealth and power and privilege does not sit too well with everyone. The crown that the prince wore, well, that the king wore, had more than 400 precious jewels in it. It was priceless, as was the crown worn by Queen Camilla. And it's very difficult for ordinary people in Britain who are struggling to put food on the table to actually watch such an elaborate program and feel any sense of something that they can identify with.
Very nice indeed. Dr. Marshall Staub, the British monarchy is having to reckon with a changing world, one much different than it was when Queen Elizabeth took the throne just shy of 70 years ago. Calls from indigenous leaders have actually repeatedly asked for, let's say, a breakaway from the kingdom. Do you think that this is going to change anything when we have all these reactions worldwide? And do you think the new king would apologize for the colonial era?
Yes, I think that's something I started alluding to when, in my last intervention, period of change. When the Queen was crowned in 1953, where before basically the Suez intervention, just to give you, an idea of the, so we were basically just at the end of the British colonial empire, basically of European imperialism. Suez basically also the start of the Algerian War, so etc. So all this is linked, and she was very much basically the embodiment, I would say, also of a monarchy which was world-spanning and which was basically very much involved in the fabric of the British Empire. And I think it's part also of their popularity because, to a certain extent, she still represented them to the end. I think it's much more difficult for the king basically to take on this role. He has the opportunity, indeed, to possibly set a different accent and possibly, let's say, some people would say apologize, and certainly get a more critical or start basically a kind of critical work which is needed in terms of the say the intricacies between the monarchy and the colonial empire. The other element which I would like to stress as well, which is linked, of course, because as your reporter said in London, it was an event which was a worldwide event, also in terms of the invitees, and also in terms of the kind of inclusiveness which was on display. On the other hand, this coronation, and particularly the anointment, is a Catholic, a very Christian, but I would say even in this case, though it is a Protestant country, a very Catholic, basically, rite. And it was it led to all sorts of very awkward moments. I felt I'm all for inclusiveness, but what do you make of, let's say, the Prime Minister reading from the letter of St. Paul when the Prime Minister is a Hindu, and obviously talking about Christian universalism, okay, in the case of St. Paul, but I'm not sure basically this was something he would want to. So that's where you saw the contradictions of all this, which is something which started, of course, as a civic religion, if you like, as something which is deeply ingrained or rooted in religion, as it were, becoming more and more secular while keeping the form of religious rite and trying to adapt. So basically what is going to happen, I think, is You have a British fudge, which is basically, this kind of arrangement where we try it and see basically how it goes. But I'm not sure this will convince either the country or indeed the world when it comes to the reign of the king.
Mm-hmm. Thank you indeed. Hafsa Kara Mustafa joining us live from UK as well, a writer and political analyst. Hafsa, could you tell us, King Charles III comes in an era that seems to be boiling, and calls from indigenous leaders, just to paraphrase this question, have intensified on the eve of Charles' coronation, with many demanding the new king to apologize and make amends for what the genocide, they say, the British Empire carried out, which begs the question, will Charles apologize for colonialism?
Frankly, I can't see this happening because, of course, an apology will come with consequences, i.e. actions. And I think that the ceremony, with all the sort of aspects of inclusiveness and various religious leaders attending and people from across the Commonwealth, was probably the sign of an extended hand. But an actual formal apology, I think that's another issue, because of course it might imply that after the apology would come certain forms of action and reparations. And I think that's very problematic, because a lot of the wealth of the monarchy is, in essence, has come from its various colonies, and a lot of the jewels, if not most of them, have obviously come from various colonies across Africa, or as the Kohinoor, for instance, from India, which is already actually being a source of dispute in India, where some people are actually requesting that it's returned. So I think that we're going to see some sort of gestures towards the former colonies, and some form of sort of aspects of his reign that will be very inclusive and be very open to various the other religions of the United Kingdom. But I don't think that there's going to be any form of action and any form of apology, given the consequences and the political weight behind a decision of this sort. No.
Thank you indeed. And to have a deeper look at the most important stations in the life of King Charles III, let's follow this report signed by Zahra Fajani again.
The eldest child of Elizabeth II and Prince Philip, Duke of Edinburgh, King Charles III was long waiting for proclaiming the throne. Of his 40 predecessors, he was the only crown prince to wait nearly 70 years. Prince Charles Philip Arthur George was born on November 14, 1948, at the Buckingham Palace, becoming second in line to the British throne. With the death of his grandfather, King George VI, his mother became Queen Elizabeth II on February 6, 1952. Prince Charles then became the direct heir to the throne at the age of 3. On July 1, 1969, Queen Elizabeth II invested her son Charles as the Prince of Wales in an elaborate ceremony at the Carnarvon Castle. King Charles III graduated from Cambridge University in 1970 to join the British Royal Navy from 1971 to 1976. On July 29, 1981, he married Diana Spencer at St. Paul's Cathedral in London, in a ceremony attended by some 750 million spectators around the world. Diana then became Princess of Wales. After having 2 children, Prince William and Prince Harry, the then Prince Charles officially separated from Lady Diana on December 9, 1992, and signed the divorce paper on August 28, 1996. However, Lady Diana remained Princess of Wales. On August 31, 1997, Diana died in a car accident in Paris, and Charles insisted that she be buried with royal honors. King Charles III remarried after Diana's death to Camilla Parker Bowles in Windsor on April 9, 2005. Charles became king upon his mother's death on September 8, 2022. At the age of 73, he became the oldest person to accede the British throne.
Back to you, Professor Marshall Staub. How significant is it that Charles is less popular than his mother?
I think it will. Yes, it's a very difficult position. It seems to me, precisely because of the challenges ahead. I was also struck. I've been in this country for almost 20 years. I remember vividly the Diamond Jubilee, because we had, for instance, a street party where we live. The Platinum Jubilee, basically there wasn't much, but obviously we're talking about a very elderly monarch, and so I think there was something very subdued about the whole climate. And indeed, the Queen died shortly after that. Here for the coronation, I hardly saw basically. I mean, I have no sense of kind of enthusiasm in the country. So I think you will always see people basically, waving the flag, etc. about it. But I'm not sure indeed that that the monarchy is as popular as it is. And there was if I remember well, a poll recently saying that the younger people are, the less attached they are to the monarchy, and to a significant proportion. So that is a huge challenge. My guess is that he knows it's there for, he won't basically last as long as his mother, for sure. And so his purpose must be, surely, to make sure that his son inherits the throne one day, who might basically be in a better position to, get the younger generations basically to warm to the monarchy. But I think the monarchy is in trouble, and so because the country is, as was mentioned by someone else here. I mean, Ivan, I think, yes, mentioned it. The country is in a difficult situation.
And speaking of Dr. Ivan Ridley, let me redirect this question to you, Ivan. The state of the kingdom is far from united, according to analysts, and there have always been tensions between the constituent nations of the UK, as you mentioned earlier, England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland. But recent years have exacerbated the frictions. Will the United Kingdom break apart during his reign?
I don't think that Charles, in the long run, has the diplomatic skills of his mother to be able to promote a united kingdom. He has a very powerful PR machine behind him, and this has been illustrated in the acceptance of Queen Camilla. I mean, let's just remember that Camilla was the third person in the marriage that Diana, Princess of Wales, exposed on television. And people were quite shocked. There are still a lot of people who are Team Diana, if you will, out there who simply look at Camilla and see a woman who committed adultery and broke up a marriage. So, and of course, this has been exacerbated by the recent book Spare, written by Diana's youngest boy, Harry, who is married to the actor Meghan Markle. There's a bit of a soap opera going on in the royal family, the sort of thing that was never allowed to surface during Queen Elizabeth's reign. And so, as I say, Charles has a huge legacy in front of him to step into his mother's shoes. I'm not sure that he will do it as well as she did. She was most faultless during her extraordinary reign. And the Elizabethan period was a very productive, successful period as a whole for Britain. He has now taken over the reins of a king to a country which is broken, which is fractured, which is not a united kingdom, and which is going through a recession at the moment. And quite how this will manifest itself, I'm not sure. But he does have this very powerful PR machine behind him that ushered in the period of Queen Camilla and King Charles. So, you know, only time will tell, but I'm not sure that the British people are going to be that patient. On his side, Charles is a progressive individual. He spotted problems with the environment and climate change long before it was being talked about in the British Parliament. But of course, will he be able to resist meddling in politics? We'll have to wait and see. But the fact that the most powerful politician in the world, President Joe Biden, didn't go to the ceremony, I think was also quite damaging, because he certainly partied hard as the President of the United States in Ireland just a couple of weeks ago. So the fact that he didn't come or feel as though it was important enough an event to come to the coronation, I think speaks volumes as well.
Very nice. And Hafsa Kara Mustafa, do you agree with Dr. Yvonne Ridley? Do you think that the monarchy will end with Charles?
Well, no, I don't think so. But I also slightly disagree with many points made, because I actually think that today Britons, because the Queen Elizabeth died at quite an old age, and I think that gave her a sort of respect that is bestowed by old age. People tend to glorify and see her reign as a very successful one, when in fact, not only did she oversee the loss of many territories from the Commonwealth, which I don't think is quite a key to success, but actually there were many scandalous moments. I mean, her sister had quite a reputation, and she was involved with I think a divorcee, and there were many scandals throughout the throughout her reign, and she went through many periods where she was incredibly unpopular. In the late 60s, after I think it was an accident in Wales, where she appeared to show very little emotion. Throughout the early years, she was seen as a very aloof, distant monarch, and she wasn't that popular. I think her popularity increased as she became seen as a sort of the grandmother of the nation, but even as sort of relatively recently as the death of Diana, she also went through a very, very unpopular phase. So I think what this indicates is that the popularity of the monarchy, it fluctuates. And so whilst I would definitely agree that King Charles is not a very popular monarch and will have difficulty settling into his role, I don't know if the monarchy is in danger, primarily because William and Kate are, on the other hand, extraordinarily powerful and popular. So if Charles manages to capitalize on their popularity, I think that will ensure that the monarchy remains an institution. And I think, of course, the British public doesn't really bear a grudge. So they tend to, love and hate at different times. And again, with Queen Camilla now, it seems to be the same thing. 10, 15 years ago, she was one of the most hated figures in the UK. And now she seems to have quite a popular following. Obviously not as popular as one would hope, but she's definitely not as hated as she was. And I think, to a certain extent, I think that means that the institution of the monarchy is not really in danger in the UK. However,
but how do you think he will deal with the royal family drama? And don't you think that this is perhaps going to affect his popularity or the royal family popularity in general?
Well, I think in a certain way, the Harry drama has actually served the monarchy quite well in the long run. In the short term, it's been extraordinarily damaging. But it's been very, very good for William and Kate, who have come across as being, far more royal and very much suited to this role. They haven't complained. They haven't been involved and been dragged down. So that's made them far more popular. And I think in a way, the way we've seen Harry relegated to the sort of bottom of the league during the ceremony shows that actually Charles played the long game and sort of, let things die down and die their natural death and move on with his monarchy. I don't think that Harry now is the major challenge. I think obviously Charles will be facing many more challenges, but I think the sort of Harry dossier has now been shelved. And the issues that he's going to be facing, obviously, I think the fracture of the United Kingdom is a major point, but that's far more on the political side and how the next few years and how the inflation and how the economy pans out. And that's not really something that is in his hands.
So somehow you agree with Dr. Marshall Staub, who said that perhaps the new generation of the royal family can actually better the image. But does Mrs. Yvonne Ridley agree with that point, that perhaps the new generation is going to perhaps make the royal family and the United Kingdom as a kingdom, let's say, going to maintain there and survive?
I don't see, when you consider the people of Wales, the people of Ireland and the people of Scotland, there isn't that same regard for the royal family as there is in England. All of today's pageantry actually just served as a reminder of the colonial mindset of some elements of the English population, which look back on the days of empire, the colonial occupation of lands. Just the jewels in the crown, for instance, many of those are regarded as stolen or looted from the diamond mines in South Africa and India. That people are saying that those gems belong and should be returned to India, to Afghanistan and other countries. There is a lot of awareness now of how the royal family accrued this incredible wealth that they have. And if Charles is really going to be apologetic for the legacy of empire, then he should be coming up with more than apology. He should be coming up with reparations for the people whose ancestors were kidnapped from their homes and sold as slaves. The wealth, the extraordinary wealth of the royal family can be traced back to the slave trade. This is something that people are very conscious about. People of colour were delighted when Harry married Meghan Markle, a woman of colour. But when that started to fall apart and we started hearing stories of racism and unconscious bias within the royal household, that frustrated a lot of people of colour in Britain, which is a very diverse community these days. It's no longer an all-white population.
Very nice. So just to have a look at the challenges that are awaiting King Charles III, I mean the accession of Charles III as crown of the UK is to bring many challenges for the newly crowned monarch of Great Britain, especially that the world is witnessing big challenges and pivotal redirections at all the levels. Let's follow this report and then we get back.
What really goes on behind palace doors? The British royal family may appear prim and proper to the public, but they've faced their fair share of controversies over the years. Over the centuries, royals and scandals seem to go hand in hand. Whether it's about a queen who never married, rumored infidelities, or more recently loyals who choose to leave their senior duties, it's never a gloomy moment.
The royal family have an extraordinary ability to bounce back, sort of Terminator style. Just when you think they're really beaten, then they pick themselves up and keep going. There have been moments when the monarchies had been in a really bad way, and not just in the 20th century or the late 20th century, in the moments that we all know about with Diana or any of the scandals, and now with the damage that Harry's done. And I think it is damaging.
With the ascension of King Charles III to the throne, emerged a new chapter in the lengthy and turbulent history of the British monarchy. The UK new monarch faces multiple challenges as the country battles with rising inflation due to the energy crisis, above the rebel environment gaining strength across the 14 Commonwealth realms. Questions are being raised on the relevance of constitutional monarchy in the modern era, especially that protests have taken place at the wake of Charles' coronation.
This will have cost a lot of money. No one knows the exact figure yet. 250 million has been mooted, so is 150 million. That is a lot of money at a time when people are really, really struggling. We know that there have been protests today, and that Republic was one of the things it wanted to say was that this is too expensive. We don't need so much pomp. They could be a slimmed down monarchy, both in terms of who they are, but economically.
Despite all the challenges, Charles is expected to deliver the same stability, continuity and strength to the dignified institution of monarchy that has been displaced for the past 400 years. Charles will have to plan wisely how he will modernize the institution and help maintain the favor of the public. He is already looking at slimming down the royal clan to decrease the cost of burden on the taxpayers.
Back to you, Professor Marshall Staub. So what is your general reading of the boiling social front?
Well, we have to see, let's put it that way. The British monarchy is, of course, has a reputation which goes and I would say also responsibilities, and in particular in light of the history of the British Empire and the role of the monarchy, which are basically relevant to the whole world. And I think that's basically the kind of the level at which I would see the kind of challenge more than just the national level. I think at national level there are big challenges. Some of them are common to many countries. Let's say the kind of Brexit has made it even more difficult, but the cost of living situation is something which we encounter in other Western countries, and indeed in other countries in the world. We have, of course, a geopolitical situation, which is a situation which regards the whole world. We are going towards a multipolar world, which is no longer dominated by the US, as it was after the fall of the Berlin Wall. So some of the situations are homemade, but as I said, in terms of national context, we can see that some of these challenges are shared with other countries, and indeed, as I think Yvonne was saying as well, these are things which are, or was it Hafsa, which are relevant to politicians as well. So more than the king. The king is not basically kind of in front of that. We have to ask ourselves, and that's basically would be my answer to that, is what is this institution of the monarchy? As I said, it's an institution which goes beyond Britain in terms of responsibility. Also, possibly what they want to achieve, basically, is they want to be worldwide celebrities, and to a certain extent they are. But changing the status, basically, from being a monarch of a Commonwealth to becoming kind of celebrity worldwide is complex, and indeed, it is something which will not be welcomed by many people as well across the world, because it will be seen as a way of avoiding certain situations or certain conversations which are to be held. Regarding and all this has been mentioned. the role of the colonies or the former colonies, but also the monarch is head of state, not just of the United Kingdom, but also as 14 basically states worldwide. Some of them basically are just asking themselves, why should we? What we could warm to the Queen, but why now Charles III, who chose him, is still basically a man of our age. So all this basically is playing an important role which we should bear in mind. And I think that today was there partly, and especially I come back to that, the kind of emphasis on the medieval aspect, the traditional aspect, etc., while at the same time saying we are modern, we are secular, we are a kind of plural society. All this basically was there in order, I think, to try to settle the monarchy. I'm not sure basically that a coronation and an anointment in particular is fit for purpose.
Very nice indeed. Thank you so much, Marshal Staub. Now, let's just follow two reports, actually, just to shed light on the latest tension that is flaring during King Charles' coronation, as police arrested the leader of the anti-monarchy group Republic, Graham Smith, and 51 others. The arrests have sparked a debate about the balance between the right to protest and the need to maintain public order. Let's follow.
In a move to maintain public order and prevent disruption, police arrested the leader of anti-monarchy group Republic, Graham Smith, along with 51 others at King Charles' coronation on Saturday. The officers claimed that their duty to ensure the safety of the event outweighed the right to protest. The Republic campaign group was quick to respond, alleging that Smith had been detained before the procession began. Images of police officers seizing placards from demonstrators quickly spread across social media, sparking outrage among supporters of the group.
They've arrested 6 of our people, including our main organiser, and they've seized hundreds of placards. They won't tell us what offence these people have been arrested for, and they won't tell us where they're taking them, and they won't say what they've done with our placards.
The protests were not limited to London. Participants in Glasgow and Cardiff also took to the streets, drawing attention to the cost of living crisis in Britain and contrasting it with the extravagance on display at the coronation.
I don't believe that anybody's born more important or with more rights than anyone else. I think we're all equal, and I think it's disappointing in this country where we are now. It's very modern, very forward-thinking, very inclusive country. We've still got this fascination with the monarchy who seem to think it's fair in this day and age. Cost of living crisis, people are struggling, really, really struggling to spend such an elaborate amount of money on a party.
It's good noting that a few days ago, new powers were granted through a royal assent that allowed police to detain protesters for up to 12 months for blocking roads, airports and railways, and for 6 months for locking on to others' objects or buildings. The clash between protesters and police highlighted the ongoing tension between those who oppose the monarchy and those who support it.
Our intention is to show that there is a Republican movement in the UK, and it is growing every single day. The trends show more and more people dislike the monarchy and want an elected head of state or no head of state or a democratic alternative to what we have now, and we're here just to show that we exist, and this is a very common belief in the UK.
Regardless of one's position of the monarchy, it's clear that the arrests and new police powers has sparked an important conversation about the balance between the right to protest and the need to maintain order and security.
And before I give the final word to my guest, let's follow the reactions of the newspapers across the world.
For centuries, the British monarchy has captivated minds, hearts, and countless newspaper headlines around the world. As England celebrated the coronation ceremony of King Charles III, many front pages of all the country's major newspapers featured images of the king, his consort, and the crown jewels. Day of Destiny was the main headline in the Times, the Daily Mail, and the Daily Express, and the word Destiny was splashed large over the front pages of Britain's newspapers, as King Charles III was set to be crowned in the first ceremony of its kind in over 7 decades. For its part, the newspaper The Mail featured on its front page a photograph of the king aged 20 as his investiture as Prince of Wales in 1969, and also added that the king's coronation will be a less lavish affair than his mother's. However, the newspaper The Daily Mirror's front page says Charles III will bear the weight of history and the hopes of a nation. The Guardian, for its part, came with some headlines about Prince Louis. According to them, the prince stole the show during the coronation ceremony with his captivating behaviors. However, the independent newspaper focused on Trump's reaction on Charles' coronation ceremony, as Donald Trump claimed that the British people are greatly insulted by Joe Biden's no attendance at the King Charles III coronation in London on Saturday. Other media outlets, such as BBC News, focused more on Prince Harry that attended the coronation ceremony without his wife Meghan, and underlined that the prince wasn't invited to appear on the balcony as the rest of the royal family members. As for international media, CNN said the King Charles ceremony was deeply religious and magnificent. It also added that the coronation of King Charles is a visual feast veiled in the mists of the past. Not only media, but also many people around the world reacted on the coronation ceremony, including British historian Elise Hunt. She said that the King Charles coronation was a blend of modesty and majesty, hours after the ceremony had taken place. As for the UK Prime Minister Rishi Sunak, on his Twitter account, he expressed his pride on this special day in his country and described today's coronation a moment of extraordinary national pride. Indeed, the coronation ceremony marked the history of England. However, some media outlets around the world did not miss the opportunity to give their opinions about the King Charles III coronation ceremony and the royal family in general.
And with this, we run out of time, unfortunately, and I apologize for Hafsa, Kara, Mustafa, and Dr. Yvonne Rodley for not giving them the last word. With this, ladies and gentlemen, our special show comes to an end. Thank you for watching, and take care.